Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Kayla Lords.
John Brownstone.
Of Loving BDSM, where we help kinksters like you have happy, healthy power exchange relationships. We're doing a thing for a first time, and it's making me super nervous.
Really?
Welcome to the first video of Kinky Book Club.
Ooh.
I don't really know how things are going to go. I know what I've planned, but I know how plans tend to work out. We are doing the very first video where we talk about a book each month, give our thoughts, give our feelings, give a sort of a review, talk about why, especially in the case of this first book, Tongue-Tied by Stella Harris, why we think people should read it, and sort of talk about the different points covered and things that stood out to us. Will it always be like this? I don't know. It's a journey. It's a journey. We did an episode on that, just saying, if you want to know more about that. So, Kinky Book Club, if you are new here, is every month. We collectively, meaning people who follow us and care what we have to say about things, read a book together, and then we come here to YouTube to talk about it. If you manage to make it for the premiere of the video, you can chat with us live. Otherwise, feel free to chat in the comments when you come to this video, whenever you do. We will have timestamps below for this book based on chapters. I think we're probably going to do that for nonfiction books, is just sort of go over them chapter by chapter. And so if you have gotten to a certain point and want to skip sections, you can do that with the timestamps. So, Tongue-Tied by Stella Harris. I don't know if you can tell, I tabbed many places. So when I started reading this book, I thought I was going to take notes on my phone, and that was very slow. So I just started tabbing, and I have not undone the tabs yet. No, we will not go over every single one of these tabs, but they did help me figure out what are we saying this time.
There you go.
If you are interested in Kinky Book Club, the link to everything, including this links to this book and all the other books we're reading this year, it's all down below. Okay, so let's get into Tongue-Tied. Tongue-Tied is untangling communication in sex, kink, and relationships. This is the second time we've talked about this book here on the channel. We did a review. I'll link to it below. This is now my second time reading the book. A quick overview. It is communication 101. It is, I don't know how to talk to my partner about anything. How do I do that? You read this book. I would say this is the resource we now recommend above all others.
Well, even if you think you're good at communication, it's worth reading. I always felt I was decent at communicating. And after reading the book, I was like, wow, there's some points I could really, learn about or strengthen,
or just be reminded of things you think you know about, and then you think, oh wait, thank you for that reminder. The first time I read it and the second time, I was validated. I was like, oh look, these things I've said, these things I've done, somebody else thinks and says them too. It is not specific to kink. I know in conversations I was having with folks in our Patreon-only Discord channel about this, there was some disappointment that it was like, yeah, but I know this stuff. What about the deeper stuff? This is definitely a 101 book. Even if you're good at communication, I would highly recommend sort of having it and reading it, because like you said, you'll be reminded of things. There will be points you haven't thought about. But it does not get specifically into, like, every bit of advice is not exactly about kink. You're gonna have to read it through the lens of, oh, they're talking about how, I don't tell my partner I'm not getting off when we have sex this way. That's not my issue. Let me relate it to telling my partner, I really don't like how they're tying me up. I really don't like how those spankings are going, or whatever. So there is a little bit of translating in your head between what you're reading, the examples, and your own situations. So let's get into it. The very first thing I liked about this book, before we even got into the chapters, and there are 12 chapters, is setting expectations. And that is a theme through this entire book. There's a section on setting expectations where the author talks about how she's going to discuss gender, which is as gender neutral as possible, how she will use certain terms, and letting you know what you can expect going through. And that is also communication 101. We will, the very first chapter talks about expectations. So I just wanted to point that out. if you get this book, your first time reading, don't go straight to the chapter you think you need. Start at the very beginning because there's valuable information all the way through.
It builds on itself.
It does build on itself. So chapter 1 is what are we aiming for? And in general, this chapter is about the purpose of what you're trying to do. In general, that's clear communication and a healthy relationship. And what Stella Harris, as the author, says is that centers around boundaries and expectations. Yes. It's anytime you're talking to anybody, your partner or anybody, those are the two things you want and need. What are my boundaries? How far are we going to go together or individually? And what are my expectations? And so that chapter is about that specifically and asking you to think about what is the purpose of clear communication. 3 things stood out to me in this chapter.
Okay.
The first one was the statement she said about boundaries. Everybody gets to have boundaries. We absolutely need to have boundaries. But she challenges you to think about boundaries beyond control of what you like and what you don't like, which are valid. Please always do those.
Sure.
She pointed out that some boundaries are rules we create because we're afraid. Now, I think in some ways that's okay. If I am afraid of a kink I've never tried, the boundary is we're not doing that until I learn more. I have said I don't want to do that, and then the reality is that was the initial boundary. I learned more. I changed the boundary. But sometimes we create rules in our relationship about what people are allowed to do or not allowed to do. Maybe you're in an ethical, non-monogamous relationship, whatever. And if all she's saying is when you put a boundary in place, think about the purpose of that boundary. If you are afraid of something from your past, we would call them bad tapes.
Yes.
And you want to control a situation so you don't ever have to face that fear, and so you put that boundary in place. Be aware of that. That doesn't mean that boundary is not valid. I thought that was important.
Yeah.
And telling. It's that being able to communicate those things, you need to know why you're doing those things.
Yeah. And it may not be every time that you have to do this, but when you set a rules, you may have to look inside and see what the underlying reason for it is.
Exactly. And then from there you can adjust or you can communicate it more clearly, especially if it comes from a place of fear and you're aware of that fear. Saying to you, I don't want to do this because I am scared of this thing that happened, gives you a lot more information. And it gives us potentially a place to go from there. Is it a boundary or a limit that will stay there forever? Maybe. Is it something we can work with? Maybe. Another thing that she pointed out in this chapter, which is important, and please remember it forever and ever and ever, amen. Don't assume anything. Now, that's just good life advice.
Yes.
How many of us are old enough to know what happens when you assume who you're making an ass out of? You and me, by the way. But in this case, in chapter 1, she was talking about the language we use and the way we talk about things. So just because it's crystal clear to you in your mind does not mean that your partner's going to understand it the way you do it. So you want to talk about what you mean. It's not just, here's a thing I think. Okay, what do you mean by that? What does that look like? Get into asking questions of each other to make sure you're clear. A lot of problems in communication happen because of assumptions.
Yes. I mean, assumptions work great for fiction books where you build tension between characters, but in real life, it does not work out all that well most of the time.
No.
So, yeah.
And yeah, if you ever find yourself going, well, they should just know what I meant. You're making an ass out of somebody is all I'm going to say there. And we have all done it. I do it. You do it. We all do it. We have to check ourselves. And if there seems to be a breakdown in communication somewhere, that's probably where it is. And one final point from this chapter that I thought was telling, she did not spend a lot of time on it, but it was one that stuck out to me. And that was, incompatible communication styles does not mean your partner is a bad communicator. There are styles and ways of communicating. I, if you haven't noticed, am an over-communicator. Thankfully, I am in a partnership with somebody who is receptive to that. You, on the other hand, have to have it pulled out of you.
There are times that you have to, kind of...
I'm going to tell you everything I think. Even the things you wish I wouldn't, which is not always good, by the way. Just because my style is full of communication does not mean it's the right way to go. So that was chapter 1. It's fairly short, if I'm remembering now. Okay, so let's get into chapter 2.
Okay.
That is, why do we get into trouble? And by trouble, we mean trouble with our communication, right? And the big premise of this chapter is that no one's taught about this stuff, which is why you need the book. We can barely talk about sex, even on a mechanical level, in education.
Yes.
So nobody's talking about, here's how you actually have this conversation with people. So some points that stuck out to me, and I, again, will remind those of you who've read the book already, if you've read chapter 2, what are the points that stuck out to you? Because y'all, look at my tabs. Okay, so this one goes back to something we've talked about before. We've talked about it in terms of teamwork. And this is the idea of competition and winning in communication. That's where a lot of people will go wrong. Where you want to win the argument, you want to be right, you want to have your point heard over anybody else's. And what it really should be about is collaborating. What are we building together?
Right.
And quite frankly, if you can't collaborate, why are you together?
I mean, something you have said to me on occasion, because this is a point I have gotten stuck on myself, which this kind of helped. You have made the point to me, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy?
That's not a perfect thing for everything, but in a lot of petty bullshit stuff, I use that and I go, oh, I don't care about being right. And I'm a person who's highly competitive and likes to be right.
Yeah.
Who really thinks I am most of the time, just saying. So yeah, that's a huge point of contention for many relationships.
Right. And I think that's something that, because when you're in a relationship or trying to build a relationship, it's not about winning. It's not about losing. There are no winners or losers. There is a compromise. There's a meeting.
And also it's sort of cliche, it's very memeified in the inspirational meme world of, it's not you versus your partner, it's the two of you versus the problem. That is in a relatively healthy, needs to move forward relationship. Sometimes it is you versus your partner, and when it is like that is maybe when to think, are we supposed to be together? But in general, it is you and your people in your duo, in your trio, however you've got your relationship aligned, versus the thing you're facing, the thing you're dealing with. The other problem that we tend to run into is an inherent sense of fairness. And this isn't necessarily a good or bad thing, that we want to be fair to each other, and that most of us have that sense of fairness, which in communication, to me, the way I think of that is remembering to not talk so much and to sit back and be fair to you and listen to what you have to say, and to remember that I have my perspective in a conversation or an argument, and of course I think I'm right, but my perspective is not the only perspective.
Sure.
So being fair to you is at least being willing to look at your perspective and let you voice that, even if we end up not agreeing, even if we have to find a third way because we can't meet in the middle somewhere. We go back to a third point that was mentioned in the first chapter, which is assuming that there's a normal, or that everyone knows something. I see this in BDSM a lot of, well, everybody knows the dom always does this, or the sub always does that. Well, none of that's true. There is no always and everyone in anything in life. No point in life is there a universal truth about how we navigate the world as individuals and in relationships.
Sure, because nobody's cookie cutter. Everybody's
exactly
unique in their own way.
And when you assume that the way you think of kink or power exchange, which in the book the examples relate to sex and relationships, but for our purposes, kink and power exchange, if you assume that the way you do it is normal, and so everybody knows what you mean when you say something, or again, you do not clearly explain yourself and you just throw out a blanket term, and you're working on one set of assumptions of what that means and your partner's working on another set, you're at cross purposes before you've even gotten started.
Yeah.
And that can be super dangerous when you're playing with kink, when, you know, your idea of a spanking is a few light swats on the butt and your partner's idea of a spanking is like 85 paddles, 3 canes, and you're, you know, hanging from the rafters of, you know, your attic or something. Like,
okay.
That's, I mean, does it sound appealing? A little bit. But do you see the difference between those two pictures of what spanking can mean? Everything means something different to each other, and when you don't sit down to discuss what those things mean to you individually, now you're in trouble with your communication. And this last point from this chapter stood out to me because it's a submissive thing.
Yep.
I said it as a vanilla. I say it when we're having sex sometimes because I can't think of words. Is not a great way to go through life, though. Whatever you want is not an answer.
Oh, absolutely not. No. That leaves openings for so much trouble.
Well, can we take it back to just relationships?
Yeah.
How many times have we had the discussion about dinner? And you're like, what do you want for dinner? I'm like, I don't know, whatever you want. And you're like, well, that's why I'm asking you. I don't know what I want either. You're already not communicating on something as basic as a meal.
And I have worked very hard to not go there. I have actually changed that. When that question is asked, I'll be, well, do you have a preference?
Mm-hmm. Or what I like to do with you is go, here are 3 or 4 choices that would be acceptable to me.
Right.
Which do you want? Mm-hmm. But whatever you want, and in sex and in relationships, and Lord knows, in power exchange, not a good way to go through. Because of that last point. If we're making assumptions that what you think a thing means is what your partner thinks it means, whatever you want, it can be.
Well, and here's the thing
surprising.
too. By saying whatever you want, that comes across as indifference.
Can.
Okay, it can. And it's basically a communication stop point.
Kind of, because you're not offering anything.
Right.
You're not saying, this is what I think, this is how I feel, this is what's important to me.
Mm-hmm.
You're putting the burden on the other person.
Right. I mean, if you change that to, do you have a preference? Or here are some options. Mm-hmm. You then have two-way communication going.
And as the partner hearing whatever you want, if you go with that, you're now culpable in how things are not going to go well. Because if your partner says, whatever you want, I don't care, whatever you want, and you don't push back at least a little bit to go, no, it's about what we want, and here's what I would like. And that's a good time to spell out exactly what you might have been thinking.
Right.
Because that might be the wake-up call to the person who's going, whatever you want, to go, because how many times, go back to our dinner thing, which is so vanilla, right? But so common. There have been times I've gone, whatever you want. And you're like, okay, I'm going to order this. I'm like, oh no, I don't want that.
Right.
If it happens when we're ordering dinner, I assure you it happens when you're ready to get kinky. Mm-hmm. So there were several examples through this chapter about how communication gets jacked up. Those are the ones that stood out to us. Chapter 3 was about definitions and self-awareness. Like, what do we mean when we say certain things? What do words mean to us? What are the things out there to even define? This is where it's really important to be specific. She mentions it as a lack of specificity being a risk factor. If you are not super, super specific about what you mean when you say spanking, when you say bondage, when you say power exchange, when you say serving, if you don't get down into those specifics, then you've just created problems of expectations and communication where things are going to happen that's not what you wanted.
Well, that kind of falls into the whole aspect of RAC.
Yes.
Risk-aware consensual kink.
Absolutely.
I mean, there is a risk involved with everything we do. Mm-hmm. You need to understand that risk. You know, you have to be very specific in what you want. Mm-hmm. Okay? It's just important because that kind of goes to the next point of something being clear to one person, not being clear to the other. You know, we have run across that in our vanilla life, where you're explaining something to me and you see it very clearly in your head and I'm looking at it in a complete 180
You think we're talking it in two different directions at that point, and it can be something as simple as, here's how I'm going to plan my day today.
Right.
I have to go run this errand, do this thing for these reasons. And in my mind, I'm being super, super, super clear because it makes sense to me. I've already mapped it out in my head.
Yeah.
And the way I'm presenting the information is not gelling with the way you're hearing it and understanding it.
Correct.
And what I know happens with us is that because this happens in both directions. He'll get clear in his head, and I'm super confused.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just a me thing. I mean, it could be, but it's not.
Right.
Which is we tend to get very snappy with one another because we feel like, I'm saying it, why don't you understand?
Mm-hmm.
And what has to happen for us to diffuse that situation is we have to take a breath and go, okay, let me try to explain this in a slightly different way. It is a skill to learn that, and it is a thing that takes time. You do not pop out of the womb knowing how to do these things.
Mm-hmm.
But it is an awareness that, oh, you're not getting what I'm saying in the way that I'm saying it. So you're not wrong. I'm not wrong. I just need to change how I say it. It helps that you and I, too, when it's happening to me, are super clear and going, I hear the words you're saying. I don't know what that means.
Yes.
And you do a very good active listening thing of trying to repeat it back to me the way you understand it. And that's when I clue in and go, oh, he's not getting this at all.
He's lost in the woods somewhere. We need to bring him back.
And then I have to backtrack and re-explain myself.
Right,
and I know that happens to me a lot, not because I make assumptions about what something means, but because I think, I'm not saying I think wisely or smartly, but I know I think quickly, and my mouth and my brain aren't always going at the same pace. So I am 3 steps ahead in my head, but my words aren't matching up, and so I'll get it all confused sometimes, or I'll miss words or whatever. So the main point I would say of this chapter, which is the point that I sort of jotted down, is just because something's clear to you doesn't mean it's clear to your partner. That is in all facets of life, from a kink perspective, because part of that was reminds you check in with each other. From a kink perspective, if you're checking in the middle of a hardcore kink scene and you know how to do that, please know how to do that. Work on that if you're still struggling. You can check in a conversation and should. Like, this is what I'm hearing. Is that what you mean? And it will feel really weird the first few times you do it. If you've never talked to somebody in that kind of detail and in depth like that before, it's an awkward thing, and you won't always even have the right sort of words to use that feel natural. But it, like I said, if you can stop a spanking to check in, you can stop a conversation.
Absolutely.
And check in. It's the same thing. Okay, chapter 4 was an interesting one. It was relatively short. It was to talk or not to talk. And this was I caught 2 main points here that I think, one we've talked about before, and one I don't think about enough. The first one is figuring out when to talk. And she advocates for scheduling it. And we have advocated for that as well.
Absolutely. And we've done that. We do that many times. Friday nights are kind of our coffee nights, and you and I, we will go by ourselves, and we will sit and have a cup of coffee, and we will just talk, whether it's work, whether it's personal life, whether it's our kink life. We just openly talk.
And the thing about scheduling, the thing to remember, we have done it a couple ways. One, we, especially pre-pandemic, when it was easier to go places and do things, we just scheduled time to talk. We did not schedule the conversation. We had this set time. We knew we would be together. Sometimes we sat alone in companionable silence and didn't say much. I'm here for a comfortable silence, quite frankly, as hard as that probably is to believe. But also, sometimes there are big things we need to talk about, and we will schedule that specific conversation knowing we will have that time to talk. Scheduling is not required. You don't have to do it. I know that some of our best conversations have not been when we scheduled it. They're when we're in the car together, driving down the road. We're both kind of facing this way. And there's kind of a distance between you in that situation. And something about not having to make eye contact can make conversations easier.
There's a term for that.
I know, and I can't think of
parallel communicating,
maybe,
I think it's what it's called.
Maybe.
For some people, they find especially difficult things to talk about. It's easier to talk about when you're not making eye contact, just kind of.
And it's almost like you're there, but the intimacy is different. And those are unplanned for and unscheduled. I would say set aside time, weekly, monthly, whatever, just to have the space to talk. I'm definitely here for scheduling big, important conversations, difficult conversations. And scheduling is not necessarily pulling out your planner and it's saying, hey, I need to talk to you about something kind of important. When is a good time to do that? I really want to have your full attention. I want you to be rested. I want us to be in a good place so we can go get a coffee. We can whatever. When can we talk about this thing? And sometimes, especially if you are in partnership with somebody like me who's anxious and needs to know things, you need to say, I want to talk about this topic. And some people don't need that much information. Yeah. It's enough to know, oh, there's something you really want to talk about.
That was a communication mistake I learned early on when I, just out of the blue, I'd say, we need to talk. Yeah. Didn't go over well.
Yeah, no, you got to tell me.
Can we set aside some time to talk about XYZ?
Right, and that's usually all I need.
Yeah.
The other point in this chapter that I found interesting, because it's something I forget about, is that sometimes your partner is not actually the one to talk to. In this case, the examples the author is giving are when the thing on your mind is about your partner. You're having a feeling about something. You are confused or unhappy, and it's not that you need clarification from your partner in order to understand. It's that you're dealing with emotions and you've got to work through them a little bit. And she goes to the different levels of like basic, I'm kind of annoyed at my partner right now. It's, I kind of want to talk to a friend. Or, oh gosh, there's some big, deep, serious things happening. Find a kink-aware therapist, but not everything that you will think or go through is something that you are meant to talk directly to your partner about immediately. Eventually, I'm sure there will be a conversation. If I'm unhappy with something in our kink life and I go process with a friend or a therapist, at some point, the next step is come back to you and talk about it.
Sure.
But to work through those initial feelings and to get clarity in my own head, that was a good reminder. I'm not good at that. I learned lessons the hard way. In my first marriage, very vanilla, I complained to everybody about my husband and never to my husband, because I learned very quickly he wasn't going to listen. And then when I did complain, he still didn't listen. But people who didn't need to know my business knew my business. Not a good look. Now I'm super protective of our relationship, and I have a very small circle of friends who get me and will listen if I want to. But I am so sort of shy about ever being that person again who just badmouth a partner to everybody and never actually talk to the partner, that I tend to forget, wait, you do have kink-aware friends who, within their boundaries would be happy to listen to you just like vent for a few minutes. And I do have a friend that I will sometimes slide into her DMs and go, look, I'm having a moment. Can I just bitch to you? And most of the time she's like, yeah, go for it. And we'll commiserate. But that's important to consider. I don't want to say especially for submissives. I just know it's super common among submissives. You look to your dominant partner as the one. Many of us sort of internalize these talk about everything kind of thing, and we forget that our partners cannot be the receptacle of every feeling we ever have, especially if we need to work through some of our feelings to then go work on an issue with a partner. So that, to me, would be a reminder of the importance of a kink community. Online or in person, doesn't matter. But people you can go just vent to when you need to. Chapter 5 is the next part of communication. It's called What Do You Want? And this is a thing we talk about all the time. You cannot communicate your needs until you know what they are.
Yeah, that's a very important thing. You kind of have to understand who you are and what you want.
Right. Now, there's a lot in this chapter, but 3 things stood out, and I'm going to pull out my book. Page 92. Okay. It's called The Future Perfect Exercise. I do this exercise for my professional life. I never thought about doing it for my personal life. It says, you think about where you'd like to be in 5 or 10 years, and you do a writing exercise where you explore exactly what this looks like. So she was talking about in coaching, this is an exercise they use. So it's like, imagine a day in that perfect life. What's the first thing you hear when you wake up? What do you have for breakfast? What do you do? And get detailed. So she says, you can do this for your sex life too. I would say, we're here to talk about kink, your ideal power exchange relationship. What does that look like in a very detailed way down the line in the future, not based on today's circumstances, but the idealized, perfect vision you have in your head. You will likely never get to that exact level of detail in the future, but knowing what it is you want, it's a little bit easier to work towards. The other thing she talks about is a sensation exercise, and I thought that was very interesting, and it was part of it. In terms of kink, most people think when they think of sensation, they end up thinking of pain, and some people are like, but I don't like pain. Totally fair. I like pain, and I don't like all pain. So she talked about in that chapter sensation exercises, and to think about and list feelings and sensations you want to experience that appeal to you. And she gives you a list, and some of them are what you would imagine: sharp, intense, bitten, hot, squirmy, electric, dark. Like, it's not just the physical sensations, it's the emotional and mental sensations. And to think about how you want to feel in whatever it is you're going to be doing.
But even those emotions can translate to physical feelings.
Yes. Or if you maybe don't know what the physical feeling will feel like, you know what the emotion is you're going for. When you feel the emotion in a kink scene, you can then relate it to, oh, you just did that thing and it made me feel this way. That thing, that activity, that moment, that's the connection. And then a thing she mentions, and I was like, of course that she mentioned, she said that non-kinky people should take this from the BDSM world, and we're just going to say, hey, kinksters, do this. A BDSM checklist. We have done episodes on checklists. We have a checklist if you subscribe to our newsletter, link down below. But it's a starting point. It's a conversation starter if you're talking about it with a partner, but even if you're doing it alone, it's a starting point of, okay, here are these things. I don't even know what they mean, so I can't say if I like them or not. But not knowing what they mean is actually a good thing. It gives you a thing to go Google, to go learn about, to go figure out, is that a thing that even remotely appeals to me? And then you can talk about what you might want with a partner. So chapter 6 is the most relevant chapter of this whole book. It is the longest chapter of this whole book, and it is how to talk. What I tabbed. What I appreciate about this entire chapter, and I could do probably 30 minutes on this chapter alone, is that many times we've done this too. We've said, you need to go talk to your partner. You need to go talk to your partner. And a person who has no real communication skills other than what they've done in the past, which they're trying to learn not to do anymore because it hasn't worked. It's like, yeah, but how the fuck do I do that? This chapter, oh my God. And so it is detailed. One part is body part words. First of all, what do those things mean to you? We go back to being clear, not making assumptions, but also, are there words that when you hear them, you're like, oh, no, I don't like that word for that. Words that I'm trying to think. I know there are words I don't like. Talk about boobs. I'll say boobs all day. I'll say breasts, even though that feels a little, I don't like the word titty. I'll say tit. I don't like titty. If you come at me and go, I'm gonna fill in the blank all over your titties, I'm done. I'm out of there. You've just turned off all the heat. Done. So using the words that appeal to your partner is important.
That's true.
Especially in those sexy moments.
That's true.
She talks about open-ended questions. So a closed-ended question is a yes or no question. An open-ended question is when you are asking, it's not, are you okay? That's yes or no. How are you doing? It's still not a great one because it's super easy to go, I'm fine, but it's not a yes or no question. One thing that was interesting to me in this is she talked about scaling questions, and she referenced back to, in the medical profession, a pain scale. How's your pain today? 1 to 10, 1 to 5. You can do the same kind of thing in your kink and sex communication. On a scale of 1 to 5, how do you feel about this? 1 being hell no, 5 being hell yeah. You can, I kind of consider our light color thing that we use for safe words.
Oh, the stoplight.
Stoplight, thank you, couldn't think of it.
Yes.
As a scaling question, because my options are red, yellow, green. Green means keep going. Yellow means stop doing that, but don't stop. Red means stop.
Or change the intensity or...
Yeah. Right, exactly. But yeah, this is... Ooh, and this... There was a whole section on the power of changing your mind, which, yes, you can, by the way. Yeah, she has a whole section on listening skills.
Right.
Listening without judgment in kink is super important.
And I think that's a big fear of people not wanting to communicate on a deeper level because they're feared of being rejected, being judged. So communicating is not just talking, it's listening.
Yes. And then there's so much in this chapter. Like I said, we could do a whole video on it. But one of the things she mentions is get comfortable hearing the word no. No is a complete sentence, first of all. Both sides of a slash, get to and should say no. No, hearing no is information. No, I don't want to do that thing does not mean you've lost on something in some way. It means that now you go in another direction and you find something else. It might even open up possibilities for you because you're like, okay, no to that. Well, then what do I find that can be a yes? And then you do things you didn't imagine you could. I would say, well, the whole book is super important. I mean, we still have several more chapters to get through. If you read no other part of that book, chapter 6 on how to talk. Chapter 7, super simple. It's tools and hands-on exercises. The only 2 I really wanted to touch on here, because it's a lot of different ideas, is a giving feedback exercise, which was really interesting. She framed it in a pleasurable way, like give your partner a massage or rub their shoulders, whatever. And then your job as the person receiving it is to say, it feels good when you do that. This is a little painful when you do this.
This isn't as good, yeah.
Right. So that one of you learns how to give feedback and the other one of you learns how to take feedback. And this becomes super important in kink because there are times you're doing a new kinky thing. And you, especially if you're the bottom or the sub, you have to know how to communicate.
That's right.
That's too much. That's not enough. That could be more intense. And knowing the different sensations, the words for different sensations back in that exercise a couple chapters ago, that will help you have the language. But as we've talked about many times before, when we start a new type of thing to play, that's how we do it. We start very clinically. We don't go immediately into a scene. It's when we start a wax play, we were at the kitchen table and I was like, try a higher pour, try lower, do this, wait, blah, blah, blah. And I was giving immediate and constant feedback so that you could then make the decisions of, okay, here's how to play so that it feels good, so that it's doable, blah, blah, blah. And then the other thing we have recommended this many times. I'm telling you, this whole book is just validation. Learn something new together.
Yes.
And in this case, the way I sort of interpreted that was doing it together, especially when I look at it through a power exchange lens. When a dominant teaches a submissive an activity that they know about, the dominant is in the leadership role, which is fine. That's why they're the dom. But there can be certain attitudes and ways of being based on how you interact with one another that can lead that conversation. When the submissive knows a thing and is trying to teach their dominant, it gets weird and awkward. And so sometimes the submissive is not comfortable leading because they don't feel like they're being the submissive, even though they're the ones with the knowledge. But when you both learn something new together, and this was not specifically stated here, I'm looking at it through the power exchange lens. When you learn something new together, that power balance shifts a bit and you are both on equal footing of what don't we know, what do we know?
Right.
And it's a little bit easier to explore the thing together from a curiosity standpoint and less of a, oh, you're the authority on this. I'll sit back and wait for you to tell me, to educate me, to give me the resource. In this case, when you're learning something new together, you can play to each other's strengths. You can go check out that resource together. One person's not leading the other one in the same way that you might with
Right.
other new things. And so it can be and it's also a really great way to learn how to talk to one another about a thing you're doing, because you're both coming at it from a certain amount of not knowing. And so there's no, wait, I thought you knew about this. No, I didn't know about it. You're learning from the bottom up is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
Chapter 8, I'm gonna gloss over a little bit. It's an important chapter, especially if you are having sexual experiences and new partners and multiple partners, and there is an entire chapter on safer sex. The thing that stood out in that chapter, when I look at it through the lens of kink, is about our individual risk tolerance.
Yes.
I'm a highly anxious human being who doesn't like risk. Okay,
Right.
so
we are somewhat polar opposites on that. She is not willing to jump into something. I am more willing to take a risk at something.
And that is part of the conversation. It's part of how you can't assume anything about what you think to be true is not going to be true for your partner. It's also important in terms of how quickly you explore new kinks. Like, this chapter is specific to sex and all the ways sex can be defined. When I think of it, I'm thinking in terms of kink, and we know that BDSM is inherently risky no matter what the activity does. Your physical being is at risk, your mental being is at risk, and your emotional well-being is at risk on one of those three or a combination. And so understanding your own risk tolerance and working with your risk tolerance and your partner's risk tolerance can help guide that communication. It's been super helpful to our relationship for me to go, I am very anxious right now.
Yes.
Because instead of looking like, I just don't want to do something or I'm not being a good submissive, I'm very clearly communicating, this is outside my risk tolerance zone. And so we need to do something different or proceed in a different way.
Right.
Chapter 9 is the second most important chapter to me in this whole book.
Yeah.
And it is about difficult conversations. Because once you learn communication skills, in my opinion, the fun, easy conversations, great. You're like, I am the best communicator ever.
They roll.
Difficult conversations? Whole different world. All the rules apply, but in a difficult conversation, now emotions can be in the mix. You're upset, you're hurt, you're worried, you're super excited, and your partner is not. And so knowing how to navigate these things is really important. There are two standouts to me in this. One is learning how to apologize. Got a whole section on it. The thing that I kind of went, oh my God, that's so right. It's a thing that sometimes you know, but you've never articulated. Apologizing helps build and establish and restore trust. It means you're working from the same set of facts. If I think you've done something wrong and you refuse to apologize and admit you've done something wrong, then we're not working from the same place anymore.
Right. And early on in our relationship, that was something I think that helped build trust between you and I. Because, there are a number of people who feel that dominant is never wrong, never makes mistakes. That in and of itself is wrong and a misconception.
And a massive mistake.
Yeah. I make mistakes. I am not perfect. And when I make a mistake or when I do something I shouldn't have, I apologize. Hey, I screwed up. I did something wrong here. I'm sorry.
And then what's key to apologies, I think we've done an episode on that. I'll be linking all kinds of stuff down below, is to then not repeat that to the best of your ability.
Right. You learn from your mistakes.
Right. But from a communication standpoint, us both, you being willing to admit that was wrong, or me being willing to admit I did something wrong and apologize for it and acknowledge it, now we're at a base level of understanding of the situation.
Correct.
We might have different feelings about it. We might have different thoughts about intentions and impact, but we can both recognize this thing happened, somebody was harmed, the other person has apologized for that harm. Right. The other part, which is page 200, is on fighting fair.
That is very important.
And this was the point that got to me, that I tabbed it, y'all. Where possible, assume innocence or good intentions unless proven otherwise. In a healthy relationship, it's more likely something was an accident or a miscommunication than something done to intentionally hurt you. Let the other person speak their piece, and together you can figure out what went wrong and how to keep it from happening again. The thing about that came to mind was those of us who have been in those, it's all of us, y'all, been in those bad relationships. Things have gone wrong, and we call them bad tapes, where the experiences you've had, the memories you have of those past relationships get planted right in the middle of what's happening now, and you treat the person in front of you like they're the person from your past. We have both done it to one another, and if you are trying to win this fight, it is really, really easy to go to that point of, you're dead wrong. Here, I'm going to make all these assumptions about why you did that thing. I'm going to tell you all these things about who you are based on this one moment, because of other things that have happened that aren't related to this relationship and this person. I am making a lot of assumptions about your intentions and the goodwill of what was happening here, and not fighting fair and letting that come into play fucked up more relationships than I can count. There's a difference in, like she says, in a good, healthy relationship. So if things are already toxic and this is now an established pattern, base your assumptions on what this person has done before, not on what 5 exes ago did.
Right. But at the same time, part of fighting fair, which was something that is important to me too, this portion of the book was very interesting to me too. I mean, you don't want to, if you're arguing over a specific issue, you're not going to want to dredge up everything from the past.
Right. Well, some of you are going to want to. Please don't. Yeah, I know what you mean, though. Yeah. It's not good communication.
Right.
It's deal with the situation that's happened. If you pull up what y'all argued about 6 months ago, especially if you both agreed at the time that it was resolved, now you get all this ammunition. Right. You're not fighting fair, and you've clouded the whole situation. You're no longer dealing with today's situation. You're dealing with grievances from ages ago.
Yeah.
One must-read section from this chapter, admitting you've lied. I try to never be in a position to have to admit I've lied.
Yes.
I would rather say the hard truth. That doesn't mean I haven't lied in the past, but those were old relationships and lessons I've learned that I will not repeat now. We should have a conversation one day about how we feel about different lies, because there are white lies where you say a thing thinking it will make a person feel better or not hurt their feelings. There's lies of omission. If I'm going to lie, it's going to be a lie of omission. I just won't say anything. Pretend I didn't hear that. I'll let you think whatever you want to think, and I just didn't say a word. And then there's the bald-faced awful lies.
Yeah.
The truth hurts sometimes. The truth might end a relationship, but I would rather be a trustworthy person that you can count on, whose word you can count on, than to lie, live with the guilt I will feel, because I will feel guilt, and then have it come out anyway, and then have my trustworthiness questioned, rightly so. Right. And I don't want that.
And on the opposite side of the coin, I'd rather have the truth and know where I stand.
Yes. Oh, just tell me. I don't want to hear a hard truth. I don't want to hear a hard truth. But what I really don't want is to feel like I've been made a fool of for 6 months, a year, 10 years. I don't want to feel like I've been lied to for all that time, and I made decisions based on an untruth. And that is harder. When you lie, you fix something in the short term, but it's going to come back and bite you in the ass. So learn how to admit when you've lied. In the case of the book, the example that the author gave was like, you have been faking orgasms, and now you want to stop doing that. It's a delicate balance to say, I told you an untruth to make us both feel better, but now I need to come clean. And it's going to take all your communication skills. I can't give them to you in this video. You should read this book. But yeah, it's an important thing. Editing Kayla with
John Brownstone.
Editing John Brownstone. Somehow while we were recording, we forgot an entire chapter.
We kind of glossed over chapter 10.
You know why? I know why. It was not my favorite chapter.
Oh.
The chapter made good points. Chapter 10 is specific scenarios. It gives you examples, but they're not as in-depth. The examples I was drawn to were not as in-depth as I would like.
Yeah.
So the two that felt the most significant for kink relationships, because I hear about them all the time, is handling jealousy.
Yeah.
And long-distance relationships. But if the long-distance relationships is like the equivalent of like 3 paragraphs. And I think handling jealousy is a little bit longer. And I was like, this is not enough. I could actually use an entire chapter on both.
I mean, I kind of thought the same thing. You know, jealousy is a very real thing.
And jealousy, the one thing that she said in the book was jealousy is not just jealousy, it's several things.
Right. I mean, it's there's a lot of stuff going on, you know, with when it comes down to jealousy. And it was a little lacking.
We have talked about it before in podcast episodes. I don't think we've done it in videos. And jealousy tends to be about an insecurity you might have, a lack of trust, that trust just hasn't been built, bad tapes, envy. So if you are feeling jealous, you do have to kind of do some of that inner work to kind of figure out what it is you're actually feeling. Saying you're jealous is almost meaningless.
What the root of it is.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you do need to talk to your partner, but also, just like we talked about in other chapters, you might need to talk to a friend, you might need to talk to a professional to work through what is causing those issues. And also, is there something that you're seeing from your partner and their behavior that's triggering your jealousy because they're not doing something that they should be? So are they being untrustworthy? Are they saying one thing? I love you, baby. I love you. You're the only one. But their actions don't match that.
Right.
And it's a delicate balance between what is really happening based on their behavior and what is your interpretation of what's happening based on your entire past and everything you've ever had to deal with. And that is very difficult to know, and us internet people can't just tell you in a quick soundbite, which is why I wish there had been more on that topic. And then the other thing that was like, oh, this could be interesting was the long distance relationships. And if I recall, it was like, so everything in this book we've already talked about, which is true, by the way.
Yeah.
To an nth degree. Use your technology, figure out your routine, stuff we've said about long distance relationships. And I think that's where I was like, I kind of wish there was more here. Give me more insight. Because anybody in a long distance relationship knows that you're going to live and die by your communication, because sometimes it's all you've got. And yeah, you are going to have to get good at it. And this book definitely will help with that. But I just wish there had been more.
Yeah. I mean, as a whole, it does cover it. But, you know, and for many years now, long distance relationships are a big thing.
Yeah, especially in the kink world.
Especially in the kink world. The internet, between blogging, between social media sites and the various groups and different kink sites that exist, it's a huge thing. So many people are in long distance relationships. You know, it's kind of like the old joke, you know, I met somebody who has all the same kinks as I do, but they live 3,000 miles away. I
mean, that's not even a joke anymore. I think that's called reality.
Yeah.
So I think what we need is this book for long distance relationships. I honestly, truly, if you're in a long distance relationship, a lot of what's in this book is going to help you.
Right.
There's just, and I understand not writing down all the tools, because then the book is irrelevant in a year because the tools will change. Right. So that's a minor thing. It doesn't take away from the book, but it does explain why we would have forgotten an entire chapter. Yeah. So I would be curious, y'all's take from chapter 10 specifically, since, gosh, it was so top of mind for us. For the record, it was in my notes. I am looking at my notes right now. It's there. I just skipped it. So back to the real us and the decent lighting and during the day and not in a dark, dank corner editing a video. Okay, so chapter 11, we finally get to the kink chapter.
Okay.
Negotiations and kink. Everything up to this point is going to help you. This chapter, to me, was sort of like thrown in for the person who is learning how to communicate with a partner in general and might be kinky too. And so there's just like this extra. Everything you've already read will help you in negotiations and kink. Yeah. One important two important things actually that stood out. One was in being able to communicate the scene. We talked about expectations a few chapters ago.
Mm-hmm.
What are your intentions for the scene?
Right.
Talking about not just what you want to do, but what you want to get out of it. Because sometimes what you want to do, you can't do. Somebody's going to say for it. It's not going to go well.
Mm-hmm.
Shit happens. But if you know what you want to experience or to feel, and the thing you're trying to get out of it, sometimes you can salvage the whole scene. You throw away the activity, but you still get that feeling you want.
Yeah.
The plan might be for you to string me up from the rafters, beat me with 85 paddles and 3 canes, and I might like yellow on the first paddle. That doesn't mean that you can't switch gears and go, oh, well, I will spank your ass with my hand until you scream. And I'm like, cool, go for it. I'm still getting the same thing because the intention was spank me until I'm screaming or whatever. So that was an important thing. And then the other one is what I kind of called a standout section. It's called the personal negotiation list. Actually, there were a couple whole things here that I wanted to point out. So the personal negotiation checklist, and this isn't just about what kinky activity are we going to do and how is it going to work. Here are some questions to consider for yourself. This is great for play partners, for sure. Will there be photos or videos? How do you feel about being photographed or recorded? What words or terms will you use for each other? Especially play partners. Like, what are the honorifics? What are the titles? What are the labels? Body part language. Don't say titty. I'll be done. Done. Everything's curled up inside in hibernation. Will there be sex? If so, what kind? Toys, activities. Will there be marks? These are things that can be negotiated between long-term relationships until you get to know each other and can play more comfortably.
Sure.
It's great for play partners, but it's going into a negotiation of a kink scene with these things in mind, so that you have not just an expectation of the thing that will happen and how you will feel, but the aftermath. Like, if there are going to be marks, where can they not be? Where should they be? That kind of stuff. So that was really interesting. Then the next page, deciding it won't work. I think some of us go into this, I'm going to negotiate a kink scene with a long-term partner, with a play partner, and they kind of feel like once I'm in there, I got to see it through. I'm negotiating it. And you, in mid-negotiation, after negotiation, you can decide, no, I don't want to do this.
You're right, because, there's a lot of different factors. Going back to the spanking thing, you may have on your mind that you want to do a caning scene and leave these huge striped bruises, and the other person is thinking, no, I would just prefer a sensual flogging.
You're automatically incompatible for that scene in that moment.
Right, and it's okay to say no on either side.
Please say no.
Yeah.
The next one that she touches on, again, I could have used an entire book on this one chapter, is aftercare. We have talked about aftercare. I'm not gonna beat a horse over it. I mean, right. unless he consents, I guess. But yeah, that's a good reminder to have that. Another thing was about sticking to the plan, and this one was very interesting to me.
Yes.
So sticking to the plan in the way that the author presented it here was you plan a scene, and you discover that in the middle of that scene you think, one of you thinks, maybe both of you think, ooh, I could add this activity to that, because wouldn't that be fun? I think it's different when you've been together for a long time, you've played together for a long time,
right? Because
you know each other, you know what you have done in the past, you know what works, what doesn't. You have a little bit more latitude and freedom to experiment. When you're still new to scening together, I don't care if you've been in a relationship 20 years, if it's your first or fifth BDSM scene, you're still new, okay?
Right.
And her advice is, whatever you plan for that scene, do it. Don't get so wrapped up in, but I wanted to try flogging tonight too. You can try flogging tomorrow.
Right.
There's time.
There's time. And this is something that to me comes back to consent. Okay. And during a scene, there are a lot of things going on.
Yeah.
Okay. Physical activity that's going on, whether it's spanking, flogging. There are emotions, up, down, all around. There are all kinds of, there's adrenaline, there's endorphins, there's all kinds of things floating around in the body. And I know for myself, if we agree on a certain thing in a scene, we stick to that, because especially if somebody is in, say, subspace, not everybody hits subspace, but a good many people do when they're in a scene. When someone is in subspace like that, to me, they cannot give consent.
Not safely.
No. So, to say that, all of a sudden in the middle of a scene, oh, do this to me, I want this and that. No, we're sticking to the plan, and if we want to talk about this later, when, I'd be open to doing that, but later,
right,
when we talk about it.
Because those questions still have to be answered, especially if you've never played with each other before, or you've never played in that way together before. Right. Because you have to make sure you're clear on what things mean and what your intentions are and expectations.
Absolutely.
And everything else already discussed in this book. As you establish a long-term, we play together all the time, or we've been in a relationship and we've been kinky in a relationship for a very long time,
right? That
will be based on your determination. You get a lot more leeway.
Exactly.
You can become a lot more relaxed because you have all that information from past
for
time.
us, we've been together long enough. We understand each other's boundaries. We know what can and can't be pushed at certain points.
We also know that the other will stop or will speak up if something doesn't feel right.
Right.
That's a trust thing that has to get established. I have to know that sometimes I'm disappointed when you stop early.
Right.
But you stop early for your safety or mine. So
there have been times you have used your safe word. There have been times you would have been more than willing to keep going. And I've been the one to say, no, I think we need to stop.
Exactly. So that was a really interesting section. I would love to know y'all's take if you've read that section. The last chapter, not much for me to say other than of course, there was one real good point I liked, and it was about nurturing. It was about taking care of yourself, your partner, and the relationship. So there was a section on self-care. Right. This is true of both sides of the slash, but I'm going to speak to my submissives out there. If your part of submission is serving or taking care of your dominant partner, there's a reason we're told to put our oxygen masks on first in the plane. You can't take care of somebody else if you have not taken care of yourself. Right. If you're running on empty, you have nothing left to give somebody else. Right. We have talked about this in the past. So
many times.
That's the same is true for dominance.
And the same is true for dominance, because if you don't take care of yourself, whether it's physically, whether it's mentally, how are you going to be in a position to lead and take care of somebody? And
taking care of yourself is super subjective. Everybody's body has different things. Everybody's mind, your emotional, mental well-being. Like, we all have our things that we have to navigate. Taking care of yourself can mean getting enough sleep and exercising. Taking care of yourself can mean taking your medication and going to doctor's appointments, going to see your therapist. Like, taking care of yourself can mean a lot of different things based on your situation.
Or having alone time to recharge if that's what you need, to read a book or,
whatever.
Yeah.
So that's going to be highly personal, but it is important for everybody. And then the final point from this book I loved, because I'd never heard of it this way or thought of it this way. It's called the campsite rule, which in camping, leave the campsite as good, if not better, than you found it. The author implores us to please do that with people and relationships.
All right, yes.
In a perfect world, we are enhanced and made better by everybody we interact with, whether it's because they contributed to that or we learned some lessons and we became better people for the next time. However that works, that's not always the case. Some people are awful, toxic, evil people, and we learned some lessons, but man, we're not quite better as a result. But I think that if what you're trying to have is a healthy relationship, whether it's long-lasting or it's temporary or it's situational, having that idea in mind is gonna help. And it all starts with communication. From communication flows trust and integrity and consent and all the things we want to do. And if we focus on trying to be good communicators, then invariably, even when we fuck up, because we will, we leave the people we interact with and the relationships we've had as good as we found them. So I really like that. The book ends with a resource section, which I always love it when books that give advice also go, I am not the sole arbiter of all this information.
Yes.
Here,
yes.
go get some more.
And here's other.
And so you have that. And then there is a glossary. So if a term is unfamiliar to you, it may be in the glossary. Check that out. We will forever and ever recommend Tongue Tied.
Absolutely.
For people who are like, my communication skills suck. My dream book, and I don't know, maybe it's already out there and I haven't heard about it, is something like this, but specific to kink, getting into the nuances of kinky communication. These tips, this information will help you. You will become a great communicator as a kinky person, but it would be nice to read the book that talked about it through a specific lens. So what I would say is, if you know of a book like that, please recommend it in the comments below. That is all we've got to say about Tongue Tied, and it's a very long video. So that's this month. That's January 2021. If you're here for the live stream chat part, feel free to let us know what you think. If you come later, use the comment section. Talk about your favorite chapters, points that stood out to you, things you liked, things you didn't like, what you learned, all kinds of stuff. And that is it for us on Tongue Tied. Next month, we will read Push the Buttons by Feminista Jones. It is a fiction book about a DS couple. I'm very excited. We have it in ebook.
Yes.
So we both have access to it instead of what we were doing with this one, which is here.
Passing it.
So that one we will not go chapter by chapter. That one will have, I think it'll have a spoiler free section and then here are all the spoilers section. But so yeah, if you want to join us on Kinky Book Club any month, the link for that is down below. Pick up Push the Buttons by Feminista Jones. Link to purchase that will be in the description box as well. So we hope that you will join us next month for that one, and any month of the year that a book looks good to you. That's it. If you enjoyed it, we love a thumbs up. If you want more Kinky Book Club or BDSM advice, you pick. Subscribe to the channel. And
don't leave that notification bell on push so you get updates when we have new content.
Sure. If you really, really like what we do, want to help us do more of it, and get access to a Kinky Book Club Discord conversation, join us on Patreon, patreon.com/KillLords. Bye.